With more money comes more problems, such as making a follow-up to the third biggest movie of all time. Writer-director Joss Whedon wanted to make an even grander sequel, and it nearly killed him. Between Whedon buckling under the weight of his own ambition, and Marvel threatening ultimatums during the final cut, Avengers Age of Ultron became an unwieldy formula of bruised egos and corporate meddling that added up to a shit show.
Herr Strucker is the Avengers.
Can we hold them?
They're the Avengers.
Going into the first Avengers movie, Marvel Studios had no clue how to pull together their separate franchises into one cohesive film. They essentially gave writer-director Joss Whedon full control to figure it out. The $200 million experiment was a colossal critical and financial success that allowed them to plot out a 10-plus year master plan for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. While Marvel Studios aimed at making quality films, the Marvel Creative Committee, the group of Marvel executives now dictating how these movies would unfold, wanted those films to be like comic panels, leading to a greater splash page. To both sides of Marvel, Joss Whedon became their ace in the hole. Marvel contracted him for 3 years to help with all things MCU, then move on to an Avengers sequel. He attended Iron Man 3 post-production meetings, contributed to Thor the Dark World's ever-in-flux screenplay, rewrote some dialogue on Guardians of the Galaxy, shot a mid-credit scene for Captain America the Winter Soldier, and co-wrote and directed the pilot for the MCU's first TV show, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. He also found time to direct an adaptation of Much Ado About Nothing. Needless to say, Whedon was busy, but it was time to commit squarely to Avengers 2. Discussing Joss Whedon is a complicated task, since many have come forward about his history of abusive tactics, egomaniacal behavior, and encouragement of toxic workplaces, and that should not be dismissed out of hand. But to grasp the difficulties of making Age of Ultron, one must at least understand what Whedon was going through, because regardless of who was behind the wheel, it was no easy feat. It also should be noted that while the worst of the accusations against him stem from his time on Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Justice League, neither of his Avengers films have been described as problematic. With scandals noted, let's get into it.
What is this?
Hello. You are Ultron.
This feels weird. This feels wrong.
Whedon's mission was to make something bigger, better, and more personal, to challenge himself creatively and technically, to tell an autonomous story that would stand alone, that could feel like the end of the MCU.
This could be it, Bruce. This could be the key to creating Ultron.
And by creating that mission, it broke him. When he was asked to return for the sequel, he was already full of ideas on where he'd take it. Actually, in his original pitch for Avengers 1, he had a blueprint for a sequel. Ultron would be the villain, Thanos was never considered, and Tony Stark's AI assistant Jarvis needed to become Vision, thus casting the voice of Jarvis, Paul Bettany. As he wrote, the film's scale inflated to an overwhelming degree, and it became almost too much to handle.
I don't get it. The mission. Give me a second.
You are in distress.
No. Yes.
Character-wise, Ultron's cast more than doubled than the first Avengers. Not heeding the warning signs of the usual sequel bloat, Whedon maintained nearly every character from the first film, then introduced 3 new heroes and 3 new villains. He wanted to give his version of Hulk more to do and expand on Black Widow and Hawkeye, as their characters didn't have the benefit of solo films. He had to acknowledge those previous movies, lay the groundwork for the future, give Stan Lee his obligatory cameo, and throughout, the Marvel Creative Committee had parameters that the movie include Easter eggs and cameos to the greater MCU. So in came a handful of legacy characters from War Machine to Heimdall. In the midst of all of that, he also had to find time to tell a story that functioned as a self-contained one.
Isn't that the mission?
Age of Ultron was an embarrassment of riches. Seeing as it was a follow-up to one of the biggest films of all time, Disney was willing to front some serious cash to repeat that success. However, Marvel was run by CEO Ike Perlmutter, a notorious penny pincher. As a reminder, Disney owns Marvel Entertainment, who in turn controls Marvel Studios, meaning the California film business had to answer to their New York parent company, not Disney. At that point, most of the Avengers cast were being paid around $1 million each, and none of them got a cut of the merchandise with their likeness, while Robert Downey Jr. was earning about $50 million per film, most coming from a percentage of the box office gross. Perlmutter was already mad about Downey's paycheck, but now the rest of the cast was demanding pay bumps, along with back-end percentages. Marvel attempted to bully each star privately, pointing out how easily they could be recast, then be sued for breach of contract. The actors asked their new corporate daddy, Disney's Bob Iger, to get involved, only for it to fall on deaf ears. No shocker there.
There's a level of expectation that they have that is just not realistic.
Their biggest ally and asset was Downey, as he had not yet signed on for the Avengers sequel, and wouldn't do so until his co-stars were given substantial raises.
How are you guys planning on beating that? Together.
The actors stood united and won. Once this was resolved, Perlmutter asked the Marvel Creative Committee, run by President of Marvel Entertainment Alan Fine, to keep things in check. They were no longer going to accept Marvel Studios pushing back on their notes. Ultron was going to be expensive, and to them, it needed to work as instructed. Filming began in February of 2014, and nothing was ever easy. First, Whedon was dealing with some issues outside of his control. Wanting to add a new supernatural element to the MCU, he introduced X-Men characters Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver.
You didn't see that coming?
The twin offspring of supervillain Magneto fell into a weird rights loophole that allowed Marvel Studios to adapt them, but never refer to them as mutants, a term that was solely owned by 20th Century Fox at that time. After revealing their addition, Fox, almost in spite, promptly announced the casting of their own Quicksilver for X-Men Days of Future Past, now putting both films in the awkward state of unfair comparisons.
What? You didn't see that coming?
Then there was the added variable of Scarlett Johansson being pregnant for the entirety of the 6-month production. They relied heavily on 3 stunt doubles with digital face replacement, a bunch of CG baby bump removal, and the old put her behind a counter. Aside from that, most of the problems Whedon had while filming were of his own making. By the time cameras were rolling, he was unprepared. He felt his plot was structurally sound, but overall everything else wasn't up to his own standards.
I'm sorry, I know you mean well. You just didn't think it through.
Unlike the first Avengers, Age of Ultron takes place across the globe. They shot in England, Italy, South Korea, Bangladesh, New York, and South Africa. And as they traveled to each location, Whedon would continually write and rewrite. The actors would receive these new pages without context, as sometimes the previous scenes hadn't been completed.
When they see, they'll understand. I just need a little more time.
And some of those changes necessitated reshoots, which caused scheduling conflicts. Whedon's perfectionism turned into a liability, and he was caving, internally and externally, to the pressures of making a sequel to the 3rd highest grossing film of all time. Unlike Avengers Infinity War and Endgame, which had 2 directors and 2 writers, Whedon was the sole writer and director, so all these bugs were his to squash.
Everyone creates the thing they dread.
Production was a fight to keep things coherent, but when post-production started, that's when the gloves really came off. The first cut of the film came in at 3 hours and 15 minutes, and Marvel, on both sides of the coast, saw the film as a bit of a mess. It was ambitious for sure, but it was unfocused and meandering. Whedon had a rough year ahead of him. For one, studio head Kevin Feige was increasingly getting involved in the creative process throughout Phase 2. Feige has always championed the vision of his directors and would protect them from the creative committee as much as possible. But the MCU is also his baby, and he knows what he wants. Feige became notorious for watching all the footage shot for their films, saying that directors give him the pieces so he can build the puzzle. For an auteur like Whedon, he grew annoyed with the backseat driving.
Kevin knows what he's after, and he also is very, very involved, and you know, and sometimes it's contentious, and sometimes it's absolutely wonderfully collaborative.
Feeling audacious, Whedon ended the movie with the new Avengers roster, including Captain Marvel, whose solo film wasn't set, and Spider-Man, a character Marvel Studios didn't have the rights to, yet. Whedon predicted Sony's troubles with the webhead might lead him to returning to Marvel proper and threw him in on the off chance. When Feige saw it in the script, he instantly deleted it. As for Carol Danvers, Ike Perlmutter was keeping the film from being greenlit, because previous female superhero movies weren't cash cows. And Feige didn't think it appropriate to cram such a pivotal character into an unexplained cameo. Regardless, Whedon filmed a plate shot so she could be inserted if casting was finished. They eventually replaced her with Scarlet Witch. And as an example of how severely compartmentalized and overly complicated making these films are, the Falcon appears in the same scene. Anthony Mackie filmed his bit one day, wearing his costume from Winter Soldier, shot his scene in Ant-Man months later, donning a new and improved suit, then went back to reshoot his Ultron scene in his new duds. That whole time, he was never told they were setting up Falcon as a member of the Avengers, and he didn't find out until he saw Ultron in theaters.
This is awkward.
What really drove Whedon over the edge, though, was how much control the Marvel Creative Committee took away from him.
Dread it, run from it, destiny arrives all the same.
They wanted changes across the board, and Whedon and Feige had to choose their battles wisely. Seeing as how Whedon had an arbitrary goal that Ultron be shorter than the first Avengers, it is, by 2 minutes, he cornered himself in a situation where anything could end up on the cutting room floor. The requests came big and small. When Jeremy Renner was questioning joining Marvel after he spent most of Avengers as Loki's brainwashed goon, he asked Marvel to kill him off.
I've done the whole mind control thing.
Not a fan.
Whedon convinced him to stay by expanding on Hawkeye via the introduction of his secret family when the Avengers seek refuge at his farmhouse. Yet those rare respites from the action became a frequent casualty of the war between Marvel Studios and the Creative Committee. If the committee forced a change, then Whedon had to cut something from the farmhouse scenes. In one instance, Black Widow, being an assassin, asks Bruce Banner to forget the people that they've killed and run away together. Banner, haunted by those he's killed as the Hulk, outright rejects her.
And they're dead.
They're dead.
Not to me. Not ever.
Marvel told Whedon to cut the ending of the scene so their romance could be played down the line.
I understood it and agreed with what they wanted. But I also underestimated, A, the ripple effect, and B, just the fact that the thing was really wonderful. And it plays better if it finishes. There's things later on where she was playing a kind of like fatalistic cool that actually didn't make sense without the resolve having already happened.
Yeah.
And then it's just sort of, she's just doing a bunch of things and they don't necessarily come from an emotional place.
Furthermore, the Creative Committee were not fans of the dream sequences the Avengers experience when Scarlet Witch gets in their heads. The committee only cared about Thor's visions, because they insisted that Whedon set up Thor's third film, Ragnarok, along with teasing the Infinity Stones for the next Avengers. Contrary to rumors, Whedon was not told to set up Black Panther or Civil War, as neither project was official yet, as both were tied up in internal conflicts with the committee. With Thor, Whedon had him enter a cave, dip into some water, get possessed by a Norse goddess of destiny, and get some answers that leads him to trusting in Tony Stark and activating the vision. If you haven't seen the movie, I promise this makes sense. The scene didn't play well in testing, so Whedon attempted to bolster it with a Loki cameo. However, test audiences found that too distracting.
In test screenings, audiences had sort of overemphasized Loki's role, so they thought that because I was in it, I was controlling Ultron. And that it was actually imbalancing people's expectations. So Joss and Kevin were like, let's cut it because it's confusing people.
Growing frustrated, Whedon wanted to cut it all, instead having Thor come to the conclusion off screen. In Whedon's words, this is when things got unpleasant, as the committee pointed a gun at the farm scenes, saying, "Give us the cave or we'll take out the farm." Editors Jeffrey Ford and Lisa Lassick chopped it down to a mere 20-second montage to give the audience some semblance of connective tissue. Whedon reached a breaking point. Stuck in a contentious loop with Marvel, he stopped fighting tooth and nail and started conceding ground on all fronts.
Wasn't ready. I didn't do all I could.
Marvel always schedules a minimum of 2 weeks of reshoots, just in case something needs fixing, a plot point clarified, or a better idea comes along. Ultron had plenty of footage to work with, and Marvel figured those 2 weeks would be enough, which compared to the 35 days Thor 2 went through, it seemed like a win. Of everything in the can so far, what they determined for the reshoots was that the movie needed more action. Then it was on to the immense amount of visual effects work. 12 VFX companies had 3,000 shots to complete before release, more than any Marvel film before it. And composer Brian Tyler, who did both Iron Man 3 and Thor: The Dark World, was backed up by the renowned Danny Elfman. Because what's a few million more? During those last stages of post-production, Whedon slept at the studio. Avengers was a 24/7 affair. They tested the film again, and the input given to Whedon was,
"What a great setup." Okay, that's 2 years of my life.
Whedon's heart sank. To him, his mission as a storyteller is to tell self-contained narratives, not to tee up the next product.
Well, that is the mission. Did you forget?
I've moved beyond your mission.
All those characters, references, and teases that were forced upon him had not led to a film, but a cog in a machine. Kevin Feige did ask Whedon if he'd want to tackle the dual productions of Avengers 3 and 4. He immediately declined, coveting a break from Marvel and from filmmaking. But maybe Avengers 5?
You're unbearably naive.
Feige quickly and easily promoted Captain America directors Anthony and Joe Russo, and the announcement was made before Ultron's release to avoid it seeming like a reaction to whatever response Ultron got. It was probably a good thing, because during the press tour, Whedon, an extremely self-deprecating man as is, exhaustedly told reporters how much the movie killed him. He called this dream job a genuine waking nightmare, a debilitating process that left him questioning what remains of his original vision. He said he could barely watch the final cut, calling it a terrible time full of flaws, mistakes, and laziness. The first Avengers was a tough movie to make, but Whedon was mostly given free rein and wholeheartedly considers every frame his own. On Ultron, there were far too many ghosts in that machine, and he only sees the compromises.
I was meant to be new. I was meant to be beautiful.
Feige understood Whedon's fatigue and the problems he had to juggle from writing to editing, but he wished he didn't voice them so publicly.
I am very proud of it. The things about it that are wrong frustrate me enormously, and then I was so beaten down by the process. Some of that was conflicting with Marvel, which is inevitable, but a lot of it was about my own work, and I was also exhausted. And then we went right away and did publicity, and I sort of created the narrative wherein I had not quite accomplished it. And people just ran with that, and so it became, well, it's okay, it could be better, but it's not Joss's fault. And I think that did a disservice to the movie and to the studio and to myself.
After all that was said and done, the movie Whedon set out to make came to fruition, bugs and all. And he recognized how incredibly lucky he was to work with that caliber of cast and crew again.
I honestly will probably never have as good an experience. We had some outside forces we had to deal with, but when we were in the trenches, we were all in the trenches for the same reason.
But I also got to make, for the second time, an absurdly personal movie where I got to talk about how I felt about humanity and what it means in very esoteric and bizarre ways for hundreds of millions of dollars. Right. The fact that Marvel gave me that opportunity twice is so bonkers and so beautiful.
With the benefit of hindsight.
Avengers Age of Ultron uploaded on May 1st, 2015. Perhaps glitchy, overstuffed, and excessively quippy, it isn't without a soul. For every questionable decision, and there are many, there is a top-tier MCU moment. Inside its erratic pace is a darker but entertaining sequel full of big ideas and lofty themes. Today, though, the one word often used to describe it is disappointing. Whedon thought he knew every defect critics would point out, like the troublesome Thor cave sequence. What he didn't expect was the uproar of his handling of Black Widow's entire role in the film. Her romance with Banner was a confusingly tough pill to swallow, especially since she was flat out afraid of him in the first Avengers. She becomes the only hero needing to be rescued, making her a certified damsel in distress, and she calls herself a monster on par with the rage-fueled, city-destroying Hulk, simply because of her inability to have children. It was a seemingly misogynistic reduction of the character by a so-called feminist writer. though not that surprising considering what we now know about Whedon. The very Monday after the film's debut, the cacophony of outrage online made Whedon quit his very active Twitter account. This was underscored by Marvel's apparent aversion to female superheroes. 11 films in, and it was still a boys' club, and there were no public plans to change that. Ike Perlmutter refused to produce a female-led MCU film, and Alan Fine made sure Black Widow was barely featured in merchandising, going so far as to make her heroic motorcycle moment a toy for Captain America or Iron Man. You know, the guy who can fly. On top of all the other issues fans had with the film, Marvel was surprised by the amount of backlash, and it made for a very confusing opening weekend. At a legitimately insane budget of $365 million, Age of Ultron became the second most expensive film in history. Grossing $1.4 billion worldwide sounded like an achievement, but the creative committee saw that as underperforming, since it trailed the first Avengers by over $100 million. They truly believed it would have reached $2 billion had Whedon and Feige listened to their suggestions more seriously. With Whedon openly airing out their dirty laundry, inadvertently confirming reports that Marvel was warring within, the narrative helped prove to the committee that none of that drama would have happened had Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios just followed orders. Going forward, the committee would have the final say on everything MCU.
I had strings, but now I'm free. There are no strings on me.
Like Tony Stark creating Ultron, Joss Whedon may have orchestrated most of this ordeal initially, scripting an unruly program he couldn't control and paving the way for his own misery. That said, the real problem for Marvel Studios was still the meddlesome creative committee. While that conflict wouldn't truly be laid to rest until the aptly titled Captain America Civil War, the next big fight would be so highly publicized, Marvel could no longer ignore the internal strife. But who would have thought that it would come in such a small package?